This is the Bema Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we're with Elle Grover Fricks to finish this study of the life of Joseph, covering Genesis 41 through 50.
Woohoo!
Which is a lot. We're not actually going to read all of those verses, but
not this time.
Covering that portion of text anyway.
Not this time, but why forsake a review now? Let's do a quick review. Profound, simple premise is what starts our story. It's the premise of trusting in God's love for creation. There's this idea that God is for creation. He thinks it's good. The very first episode, I think, that Elle joined us on the podcast here in session 1 was his bow in the clouds and remembering the covenant. And this is what the story is trying to get us to believe about who God is. God is willing to remember the covenant. God is a benevolent, compassionate, gracious, loving creator. And that's what we need to trust. We struggle to trust this. But God eventually finds a partner in Avram. Avram's going to have his moments, his mistakes, but he's not going to be known by his mistakes. Avram's going to be known by his best moments, not his worst moments. We're not going to forget his worst moments because we're going to learn from those cautionary tales. So is he. But what's going to be the defining characteristic of who Avram is and how he's known in history is his best moments, his moments of trust in the story, his moments of hospitality, his moments of looking out for the outsider, his moments of looking out and seeing those people that might otherwise not be seen. Isaac realizes some of the fruit of that mission that God's given him to bless all nations. The Jacob storyline we said last episode, it almost seems to disrupt the trajectory. But one thing I didn't mention in the last episode, and one thing that I haven't mentioned about Yosef last episode was the chutzpah. These guys might be a dysfunctional mess. They might have some self-centered worldviews at times, but they've got some fire. They've got some chutzpah. And they want. Jacob wanted to be the firstborn. He wanted to be Bechor. He wasn't, but he wanted to be. And it's that fire, it's that intention, it's that determination, it's that commitment that God sees as unbelievably full of potential. He wants to use that. And so God calls Jacob in the midst of his dysfunctional mess, in the midst of who he was. God partners with Jacob. It's what eventually leads to the Joseph story, all of Jacob's kids, and Joseph being the one that he wants to give a couple coats to. Before I forget, by the way, Brent, we mentioned Foreman's teaching. We should make sure we link that in this episode. He had a couple teachings over the years. I first heard him when he was way back before Aleph Beta, Hofberger Institute days, but there's a teaching, or at least one, maybe a couple, we link on Aleph Beta. There is a teaching he used to do on Torah anytime, if it's still out there, called Goats and Coats. Goats and Coats. That was Foreman's lecture. I heard it in about 3 different places, and it was generally the same lecture and the same teaching, but I think there was one we found on Torah anytime. The Goats and Coats teaching from David Foreman. But then more recently, since we recorded that original episode, Foreman released what he called Genesis, a Parashah Companion, which was just a phenomenal book. And he doesn't get into all the things we're talking about in this series in these 2 episodes, but he did cover some pieces of it, and it was just really, really good. So we'll link that as well. But let's review just where we've been at in the Joseph story. So we did the review of the Genesis story. So let's just review the Joseph story. We took a lot of time to do this last week, and we did that on purpose. He's got dreams, and he tells us dreams, maybe against better wisdom. He tells the dreams to the family, to the brothers, to dad. The brothers hate him. They throw him into a pit. There's this interruption in the story of Joseph to tell us the story of Judah and Tamar, to tell us about the injustice done to Tamar, and Judah's public recognition of her righteousness and his sin. That confession and repentance that we see in Judah's story. But then the story picks back up with Joseph. We see the Potiphar story. Potiphar's wife, he gets falsely accused. He gets thrown in a dungeon, ends up interpreting dreams, get more dreams, interpreting dreams again. He interprets the dreams and essentially says, remember me, when you get out. Because I just interpreted your dream. I know you're going to get out. He says, remember me. I noticed he told the cupbearer, remember me. He didn't tell that to the baker. That was a joke because the baker doesn't make it.
Not going to be useful for Why waste the words?
That's right. So he tells them to remember, and that's where we left off, and it's where we want to pick up in the. Any thoughts you've had, Elle, since we left off in the last episode a whole week ago?
A whole week ago. Nope. I'm just excited to dive in to what we have in Genesis 41.
All right, we're going to wrap up this story. Elle needed to come with us all the way to the end of Joseph. She's got to help me out with all my Joseph opinions. Brent, give us Genesis 41. Like, let's say, I'm going to go unusual. I'm going to say 32 verses worth. Let's just let you read for a little bit.
Let him cut.
Let's see if I can get that far without you interrupting me, myself interrupting myself. Maybe Elle will have some thoughts. Elle's not really much of an interrupter, but...
Nah, yeah.
When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. In the morning his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, In my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile. When out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first, but even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dream I saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none of them could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon.
Okay, so I want to pull this apart from what I learned from Foreman in his Goats and Coats teaching. Foreman kind of walks through this story and makes some observations kind of based on some of the rabbinical tradition. First of all, he starts off and says the cows come out of this comes out of the reeds, and Foreman said, I believe it was Akiva, but Akiva said the word for reeds is the same root word as the word for brothers, and so when you think about the Joseph story, you think about a story about brothers, that seems to jump out of you. I don't even know if that, sometimes the Midrash, that's just there and that's accurate. Sometimes the Midrash is playing with some things. Is that true as you see the root word for reeds? Can you make a connection? I believe it was they had to add a consonant or something, but that's what Akiva was doing when he said, I can see reeds being brothers. The cows are coming out from the brothers.
Yeah. So in the Hebrew, it says achu, and the word for brother is ach. So you could even say it says his brothers. Their brothers. Mm-hmm.
Akiva, absolutely. But you also have pointed out before, reeds aren't even that's not just an obscure reference. They're pretty familiar to stories with reeds, yes?
Yes. So in Egyptian mythology, reeds is the central feature. In fact, the name of their mythological paradise or heaven place in the afterlife. And why I'm bringing that up will make sense once you finish off this teaching.
Okay. We'll circle back.
No spoilers.
We'll circle back. I love that. So, but it would be safe to say maybe at this point that when Pharaoh has this dream, he may be seeing something or thinking something or sensing something. Joseph hears this dream. He hasn't heard it yet, but Joseph, when he hears this dream, could absolutely be hearing potentially something totally else in his personal story.
Right.
Love that. So anyway, he has these dreams. He goes and he gets Joseph. Joseph says, I can't interpret dreams, but God can, which is interesting because he tells it's similar, but not what he told the cupbearer and the baker in the dungeon. And Foreman pointed out that there's like when the cupbearer and the baker, there weren't magicians around. Like it was a different situation. Like any magician, any dream interpreter could have interpreted the cupbearer and the baker's dream. Joseph was just trying to serve the cupbearer and the baker. Here they are in prison. They're struggling. They have dreams. And Joseph's like, tell me your dreams. Like, I'll interpret them. No problem. Pharaoh has dreams, and even the magicians can't interpret it. So Joseph knows, well, I'm not just going to be able to do this on my own fancy intellect and giftedness and wisdom. I'm going to need God's help. And yet there's an immediate interpretation. Like Joseph doesn't say, oh, give me a week to think about it. Joseph doesn't say a little quick prayer like Nehemiah does later, or Ezra or whoever it was that I'm thinking of. Joseph hears a dream and immediately just boom, has an interpretation.
Well, and Pharaoh doesn't even question it. Like Joseph says, I can't do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires.
Like,
Sure.
And then immediately Pharaoh said to Joseph, it's like, he doesn't even stop. Well, then how do I talk to your God?
Also,
It's just like, okay, dude, whatever. Here's my dream.
To give Yosef some credit, he does say, are not interpretations for God. This guy has the confidence that God is with him and is just going to supply whatever he needs. Boom.
Aha.
Right. Because he doesn't just say he might.
Right.
He says, God will give you answers. I can't, but God will.
Right.
It's absolutely got some chutzpah there.
Mm-hmm.
But he hears this dream, and Foreman made the point, like, how is he just interprets this immediately. And maybe there's nothing there. But Foreman's point was there's one key piece that no magician, no expert dream interpreter would have typically associated. You wouldn't have associated the 7-7, like the 7 cows and the 7 cows. You wouldn't have associated that with, you could associate that with so many things that would make sense. But time, and particularly years, that's something unique. So how does Joseph immediately know this? And Foreman pointed out the connections to his own family story. Not only the allusion to brothers in the reeds, here's the cows coming out of the reeds, out of his brothers, but the cows are also described in the same way that his mom and his other mom, his half mom, what would we call that? Rachel and Leah. Elle, is that correct that those Hebrew words they're the same words used to describe the cows as were used to describe Rachel and Leah?
Well, what is particularly fun is the first time we hear the dream, it's not exactly new. At first it says beautiful to see and healthy of flesh, but then in verse 18, when Yosef is there, it's switched to healthy of flesh and beautiful of lines. That's sleek. That's exactly what it says about Rachel when we first meet her back in earlier
goodness.
Genesis.
Sure. So, yeah. Wow.
I did notice that language was a little bit different when he was telling the dream to Joseph. That's it. That's interesting.
Fun times.
Wow. So it ends up, you could even see maybe the hand of the Lord and how the dream gets explained with just the right words to trigger the interpretation for Joseph. Like he ties this to his own story. He's got references to brothers. He's got references to mothers, and he interprets this dream. I have to wonder if he's even thinking about is he even internalizing this dream on his own level? And he's almost interpreting the Egyptian part of like the future and the famine, but in his own mind, I wonder if he's even hearing some things for himself. Who knows? That's all speculation on my part, but I don't know. And yet, when we get to this part, I want to ask this question. I want to start redeeming I've been so hard on Yosef in part 1. Let's start asking different questions and maybe start redeeming my opinion here of Yosef. What kind of a person is Yosef? Like he's gone through his own story, and this has been years and years and years of his own story, his own personal development, his own transformation. There's also a national story here. There's the famine. It's what it's going to do to an entire land of Egypt and all these other lands that rely on Egypt. So there's all these different levels. But what kind of a person are we going to see in this moment from Yosef? So Brent, give us the next portion of chapter 41 here.
And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. This is all Joseph talking, by the way. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, "Make way." Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift a hand or foot in all Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphanath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, to be his wife, and Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt.
All right, so I come back to this question. What kind of a person is Joseph? We are seeing now some of the character of this biblical family that we've been seeing. And I've been talking about how Joseph, I feel like he's following in the footsteps of his father. And I've meant that in the last episode in more negative ways. But now I'm starting to see the footsteps of his father aren't all negative. The footsteps of his father have some really beautiful things about who he is and why God wants to partner with his dad. And I'm seeing some of those same characteristics in Joseph. I mean, I don't know what kind of people you are, Elle. I don't know what kind of a person you are, but if I were to get like bad news from God, like if God were to send me a letter, a vision, a dream, and say, this is what's going to happen in the future, and it's really bad, there's going to be a famine so bad that you're not even going to remember how good it was. I'd like to think I would be the kind of person that we see here, but I would probably be like, oh no, like I would just fall into despair. It's bad news.
Time to pull an Elijah, head to a cave, just hang out there until it's all over.
Yeah, I'd fall, like denial. Joseph decides to fight back, not against God, but against the circumstances. Like, okay, we know what's coming. Now let's, like, I would have been like, oh no, we know what's coming. This is going to be horrible. Like if I were to get the news, like there's going to come a natural disaster. There's going to come a hurricane. It's going to destroy everything. It's going to destroy the whole city. I would be like, oh no, we should probably leave. Joseph is like, oh no, let's get ready. Let's start doing all this stuff. Let's start preparing. He's got this chutzpah that doesn't just give the bad news. He actually has a response to the bad news. So I don't know if I'm seeing the trust, like trusting the story quite yet. I think I'm going to. But what I do see for sure is this chutzpah, this stubborn, dig my heels in. I'm not going anywhere. I know what's going to happen, but that doesn't mean it has to be the end of the story type of a character. Elle, what do you think?
I think that all of that is bang on. I think also that this might have been actually what Yaakov was preparing him for and training him for. What I mean by that, just a theory, is his long, floofy, perhaps undergarment that we talked about before that signified he wasn't supposed to be out in the pasture in the fields like the other guys. I don't think it was just that he was like laying around eating dates and hummus and having a good time. I think he's being trained in the tent of his father, not just like how to take care of the sheep, but how to run the Beit Av, right? The house of his father as the Bechor, as the chosen. And so he's perhaps was trained in these administrative skills of this is how you run a whole community. This is how you take care of your insula. And so now he has a chance to do that on a much bigger level with the systems brain that he was trained in to be like, oh, my dad taught me how to set up my own household, which is something Yaakov says to Lavan. I need to go set up my own household. Let's do that, but on a bigger scale. So he's had this training, perhaps. He's had skills put in him by his father. And now he has an opportunity when he leans into chutzpah to say, yeah, I can do that. Because like you're saying, if it was me, I'd have some questions for Pero, like, whoa, I'm a dream interpreter here. You know, that's why I was asked out. And now you want to hand over all of this power and responsibility. And that self-belief that before was so grating is now something redemptive that God can use. God can use Yosef and his incredible confidence in himself in order to save lots of people's lives. Versus if he had, promoted really abrasive humility the whole time of like, oh, who am I? Then he wouldn't be there in the first place. And he wouldn't potentially be using these skills of administration that he might have picked up at home to help a whole nation of people.
Oh, it's beautiful. That's absolutely fantastic. I think about that Genesis Parasha companion book that one of my favorite parts of that book is actually the Jacob story, where Foreman points out, like, is Rivka just this slimy, or is Rivka trying to defend who Jacob is? Like, he's not the rough and tumble hunter man child that Isaac loves in Esau, but what she's trying to do potentially is call out of Jacob who he is and what he has to offer. And so this could be deeply embedded in Jacob's own story. Didn't work out the way they wanted, but he could have brought that with him and passed that on to this son that he sees a lot of himself in a beautiful way. And then he gets this vision of the story of his moms and his cows and the brothers and the reeds, and oh, goodness gracious. I never even thought about that. That's so good.
And maybe the Reed's paradise connection has to do with the way that he viewed his childhood, right? His paradise, his heaven was back there being with his dad. And now he's come out of that time.
Oh, stop it. All right. Great. Love it. Look at us redeeming Joseph one episode at a time. All right. Well, Foreman made this point as he looked at these stories. Foreman said in his Goats and Coats teaching, there's a template here that we keep seeing. There are 3 particular repeats. And then there's even 2 that get pretty darn close, 2 other ones. But we see this template. Dad, in Genesis 37, Dad gives Joseph gifts. There's a dream where they say, listen to me. Listen to these dreams. He's then stripped of his coat and he's thrown into a pit. The Potiphar story, he's given gifts from Potiphar. It went to great length as you were reading that chapter in the last episode, Brent. Talk about all the things that Potiphar did for Joseph, all the things he gave Joseph. Gifts that were given. There's a dream, you could say, that might be squishy, but Potiphar's wife has a dream of sorts. She says, listen to me. He's stripped of his coat as he runs away. And then he's thrown in a pit, like the word dungeon there. Foreman points out many times in the Genesis narrative, or in the Joseph story, more literally as not so much the dungeon we might think we would see, but literally pit in the Hebrew. And then all of a sudden in Pharaoh's story, it's reversed. So Pharaoh now pulls him out of the pit. He's given a coat. Pharaoh has dreams, says, listen to me. And then Pharaoh gives gifts. And so now it's like there's this new father figure in the story. Foreman's pointed out, like, the Tamar story and the cupbearer and baker almost have very similar. They're not quite the same. You can't quite nail it down in the same ways, but things are given, there's desires and dreams, and then a stripping. In the cupbearer and baker, there's things are given, there's dreams, and then there's pits. So it's like you have You almost have the whole list. You're just missing one variable in those other two stories. So very similar. But Joseph now has almost this new father figure. Foreman points out, Joseph doesn't know the backstory. We do as readers, but Joseph doesn't know he was thrown into a pit, and there's all kinds of things that Joseph doesn't know. Brent, what are some of the things that Joseph doesn't know? Think about the story. What are things that Joseph doesn't know?
He doesn't know the conversation between his brothers about whether they should kill him or whether they should do whatever. They don't know, or Joseph doesn't know, like, what they did after Joseph was taken.
And specifically, like what? Like, after he was taken, what did the brothers do?
They took his coat back and, like, tried to convince his dad that he's dead.
Right. See, Foreman points out, like, Joseph doesn't know that Reuben was even out trying to potentially save his life in the beginning of the story. He doesn't know about the bloody coat, the bloody robe, that they went and basically lied to dad and say that he was. So Joseph has to be assumed, like, when Joseph got thrown in the pit, got sold, like, he has to assume dad's going to come look for him. Like, I'm going to hear from dad, because he doesn't know that dad thinks he's dead. He's got to assume, in Foreman's mind, he's got to assume that dad's going to, and yet dad never comes. And so I don't know what you start to think or what you start to assume as you sit in too many dungeons and go through too much of your story year after year, and you never hear from dad, and dad doesn't come and get you. And so these are all the things that and so now he gets a new father figure. Here's Pharaoh doing the same thing for him that his father did at the very beginning of the story. And so that, it seems like, okay, that makes sense. And then you get to Genesis 42, and this new father figure doesn't last long because his brothers immediately show up in Genesis 42. So he can't just get away from his family. His family story follows him, as it does for so many of us. And his brother, his actual brother, daughter or son of Rachel, Benjamin, his full brother, son of his actual mother, is not there. His dad's kept him back. Son of his right hand, the other favorite son, the other son of his favorite wife. He's not there. So he tells the brothers not to come back. Don't you come back. Don't you come back without Benjamin. So Brent, how about we skipped 42. Let's jump to chapter 43 and give us the first few verses there.
Now the famine was still severe in the land. So when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go back and buy us a little more food." But Judah said to him, "The man warned us solemnly, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go down, because the man said to us, "You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you." Israel asked, "Why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother?" They replied, "The man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. 'Is your father still living?' he asked us. 'Do you have another brother?' We simply answered his questions. How were we to know he would say, 'Bring your brother down here'?" Then Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice."
There's some chutzpah.
Tell me more, Elle. Tell me what you see when you see chutzpah in there.
Just throwing it back in his dad's face. If you hadn't delayed us, we could have gone and returned twice.
Well,
Is that what you're referring to?
Pretty close. So this is not how you talk to the patriarch of the family. Yaakov has a history of some passivity in there. It's part of his family line pattern throughout the generations. And Reuven here, perhaps in the process of his own work on passivity, right? His passivity, his disappearing, he lost his brother.
Yep.
And so he is willing to step up to the patriarch and say, absolutely not. This isn't it.
Sure.
Let's try again.
Yeah. So at the end of chapter 42, which we didn't read, Reuben is the one that shows up, and he's like, "Listen, you got to let us go down." And he said not to come back without Benjamin, and Jacob refuses to send Benjamin. And Reuben's first response is that you can have listen, if we don't bring back, you can have my sons. And that doesn't convince Jacob. Jacob says no. End of chapter 42, Jacob says no. So chapter 43 shows up, and Jacob's like, "Listen, you got to go down to Egypt And this time Judah shows up. Judah's like, listen, basically what Reuben told you was right. Like, we can't go back down without Benjamin. This is not going to end well. We have to have Benjamin with us. But Judah's response is different than Reuben's. Reuben was, in Foreman's words, just trying to give, if you lose sons, I'll give you my sons. But Judah is in this story at this point now he takes personal responsibility. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't say this directly, but you're seeing this transformation that we saw. Maybe this is why the Judah and Tamar story is so important to the story. Because Judah has gone through some level of transformation, and Judah's now willing to put his own neck, not just my sons, not just you lose sons, you can have my sons. I will put my own life on the line for this son of yours. If I don't bring him back, it's mine. Judah has offered his own life. Judah has taken responsibility. And I love your comments about passivity, because there's all these characters that are like, and Judah's like, no. I'm stepping up because this is, I'm taking responsibility. He's gone through some process of confession and repentance. He's had this moment where he stood in public and he said, no. She's more righteous than I. I have failed here. Mm-hmm. I have sinned. It's not about his own self-preservation like it might have been in his younger days, like it might have been when they sold Yosef to the traders. It's not about self-preservation. It's not about just his own self-interest. This is what seems to get Jacob's attention. Reuben didn't get his attention, but Judah does. It's this new, humble, repented, transformed person that seems to soften Jacob's heart to the spot where he goes, okay, take Benjamin. And they head back down. They head back down to Egypt. That's Genesis 44. We won't read it. They get back down there. And this whole thing seems to be somewhat of a setup. Joseph has them hide a silver cup, his diviner's cup, by the way. Hide his diviner's cup in one of their packs. He puts it in Benjamin's pack. And it's all a setup. He basically is saying, we're going to get Benjamin, but I'm going to keep him here as punishment. I'm just going to get my brother back. I just want to get my brother back. And remember, Joseph still doesn't know necessarily the story. He doesn't know all the backstory. He doesn't know where his family's. He might know more of the backstory, having seen his brothers, but he doesn't know the heart of his father. He just wants to get Benjamin as his brother, his real, true brother back. We'll keep him in Egypt. We'll send all the other brothers back. It all seems to be this plan and this setup. And yet something happens that seems to get not just Jacob's attention, but Joseph's attention. Brent, give us chapter 44. Give us 30 through 32.
Well, real quick, speaking of getting attention, the thing that seems to get the attention of Jacob was this phrase, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. Is that some kind of a euphemism? Like, why is Judah taking that phrase so seriously? Where is that? Is that from somewhere? And maybe we don't have an answer, but I'm just like, he said that phrase twice.
Yeah. No, who knows the kind of things that could be there. Chapter 44, verse 30, Brent.
Okay. I can't delay you any further. We could have finished this episode twice by now.
Yes.
So now if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant, my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of your father down to the grave in sorrow. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life.
All right, consider what's happening in this moment as Joseph learns kind of the complete backstory, where his father's at, how deeply his father cares about not just him, but also Benjamin. Like, he's kind of hearing this, seeing this, learning. He's kind of seeing Judah's role all of a sudden play out in front. Like, all of this is happening in front of him. Brent, give me the next 2 or 3 verses right there.
Now then, please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father.
So just consider all the ways, all the dysfunction this family has known. Consider the opening chapters, not literal chapters, but just chapters of this family story that Joseph was a part of. The brothers all out for their own interest, for their own gain. And now he's seeing a changed brother. He's particularly in Judah, and maybe more of the brothers too, but he's seeing, like, the hero of this story Foreman taught this, and it's taken me a few times teaching this to get this down to where I can teach this well. The hero of the story, the Joseph story, is not Joseph. And Joseph will have his moments. The hero of the Joseph story is Judah. This is why Judah will be the tribe of, we would say, the tribe of the Messiah. This is why Judah will have this prominent role, because Judah, at a critical moment at the beginning of his story, chose to be humble enough to engage in the work of confession, to go through the work of repentance, to be transformed, and to go from somebody who was selfish. And I'm not saying completely, he went from bad to good, from dark, but he let himself be changed, transformed, made new. That's the kind of language that I think we would often use. And it's this changed, repented, transformed Judah who's willing to put his own life on the line. That gets it got his dad's attention. It got Jacob's attention. Now it gets Joseph's attention. And you see in this story, this is what grabs his heart. He goes away in the next chapter to weep and to cry, and then he comes back and he reveals himself. And now the whole story is set in motion. It's Judah's willingness to humble himself. It's Judah's willingness to repent that inspires the family to reconciliation. That's the catalyzing moment. Not just Joseph's benevolent willingness to, it's not Joseph doing, it's this moment, it's this key catalyzing moment that kicks us off. It's Judah's humility. It's Judah's transformation that kicks us off. It's his repentance that catalyzes forgiveness. And so the whole first book of Torah, this whole book of Genesis, this whole journey of the preface and the introduction, where we've discovered, like, who is this God and what is he doing in creation? What does the people of God look like? What does the family of God look like? How do they operate? What does trust and faithfulness look like? Like, all these things kind of coalesce, and the dysfunction and the craziness and the chutzpah and the fire and all this stuff kind of coalesces in this moment of reconciliation and forgiveness. And we're going to talk more about forgiveness. Elle, you had a point as we were preparing for this episode that you made that I thought was really good. We'll talk about this more, but when we say forgiveness, say what you were saying before.
Yeah, so Yosef has this beautiful line, one of my favorite verses, and he says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And when we're talking about forgiveness, just marking, like, everything that happened to Yosef is really it's full out drama, right? If you have the lullaby effect with any of these stories, you're like, yeah, and then they throw him in a pit and then he gets sold into slavery. Sure. But, like, that's devastating. And these brothers show up, and he leans into it a little bit. He has some theatrics going on. He's not like just immediately welcomes them back. He puts them through the ringer. But his ability to practice forgiveness, to find, which opens the door for freedom, for reconciliation, for meeting his father and finding out that it wasn't his father that did this to him. All of that is only possible because of the strength of his forgiveness. And this forgiveness isn't centered on the acceptability of what his brothers did to him. It's not like, you know what, I know I was kind of being a jerk with the whole dream thing, and I get where you guys are coming from. You know, murder is understandable. He doesn't say that. He doesn't excuse what they did. He centers himself in the goodness and the sufficiency, the all-sufficiency of God, that God is able to take this evil and alchemy-like, turn it into something good and beautiful and redemptive and restorative, and something that saves a whole nation. And that's his place of groundedness when he's able to face his family, right? And that's what flows out of him as they all come back together. And I think that's an invitation for all of us who've experienced some kind of hurt, that it doesn't lie in excusing the other person. It lies in finding God to be good and sufficient for us and all of our needs and all that has been taken away from us.
Yeah, so well said. We're going to have an episode in session 2 where we circle back around and talk about forgiveness. And one of the things we'll do is we'll talk about all the things that forgiveness is not, before we talk about the things that forgiveness is, because that's a conversation that we need to keep coming back to. Forgiveness will be a central theme to what it means to be a follower of Jesus and everything that Jesus calls us to. And it's going to be a big, so getting forgiveness right is important, and making sure that we don't assume that forgiveness is all these other things. And I love the phrase you just said a moment ago where you talked about his groundedness. Like, he's grounded in God's goodness and the character of who God is and what God's doing in the world. And that's what enables him. I think there's at some point in our original recording where I said, forgiveness is the ultimate act of trusting the story. And it's not saying that injustice isn't injustice, that evil isn't evil. It's not all those things. It is saying, I believe that God's up to something in the world, and I'm going to let God do what God's doing in the world. And I love that groundedness. I love that word that you used there. And that's what we see here in this story. The story of Genesis comes full circle. We end up coming all the way back in some sense, not in a real true sense, but in some sense, we've almost made our way back to the garden. Like we've almost made our way back to Shalom through some ugly, dysfunctional means. But here we are. This is a people that understand justice. They understand it firsthand. They understand it secondhand. These are people that have bumped up against justice and injustice. They understand mistakes. They understand repentance. They understand the power of humility. This is what we're learning in the introduction. Joseph will not replay. Like we asked at the end of last episode, we said, is this just like Sumerian history? Is this just stories cycling in on themselves, just telling the same story over and over again? I do what my fathers did, who did what his father did, who did what his father did. Or do we have the ability to write new stories? Is hope in play? And Joseph will not replay the story of Cain and Abel. We've heard stories of brothers in fields. We've heard stories of brothers that end in death and murder and what they intended for evil at the beginning. But Joseph's not going to replay the story of Cain and Abel. Do we believe, and one of my challenges as we close this episode today, do we believe that this is possible in our own stories? We get to choose. We get to choose whether or not we're just passive members of a cycling narrative or whether or not we're going to tell something new in our own stories, whether or not we're going to play the role of Judah and go through the role of confession, repentance, whether or not we're going to engage in the work of forgiveness and what that looks like. And I love this. Foreman will point out that you see this same relationship go all throughout Tanakh. Like it's Judah that puts his neck on the line here to save Benjamin. Like Benjamin's on the line and Judah says, I'll lay down my life to save Benjamin. And all throughout Tanakh, you're going to see Benjamin keep laying his life on the line for Judah. So I think of the story of Jonathan and David. And here is a Benjamin descendant who's going to be willing to lay down his life for a Judah descendant. I think of the story of Esther. Here's a Benjamin descendant, Mordecai and Esther willing to lay down their lives, Esther willing to potentially lay down her life on behalf of the Judah-ends, as it's said in the book of Esther, this reference to Judah. And Foreman has 10 other examples of how this plays itself out all throughout the story. And it's one of Foreman's favorite themes, and I just love that we see here. That story starts here. This story of remembering where we come from and taking care of each other.
So what about Jacob?
Well, eventually Jacob, he's going to circle back around too in this story. And this story is going to end, and we will talk more about this in session 6. But Jacob's not done either. Like, it'd be really lame if Jacob's story just kind of like
petered out.
Yeah, exactly. But here's Jacob, and he's actually going to make this key moment. He's going to have this key moment at the end of the book of Genesis. His closing heroic act as the whole family kind of comes back and sees reconciliation. You'll be tempted to think like, hooray, like the story's wonderful. The story's great. Like all the brothers are back and we're in Egypt and it's good. And Jacob's heroic act is going to be like, no, God's promises were not about Egypt. God's promises were not about our own comfort and our own just being reconciled and being happy. God's promises were about a land through which he would bless the rest of the world. Don't forget the story of God. And so Jacob's like last act is to insist that Joseph not choose Egypt. He has to take, Jacob says, promise me you'll take my bones out of here and bury them in Canaan. And Joseph's like, yeah. And he's like, no, promise me. And Joseph's like, okay, I will. And Jacob's like, no, make a covenant with me that you will. This is Jacob's final, not just dying wish, but an insistence that they remember. And Joseph, after his dad dies, is going to have to choose again what story. He has these two father figures. He's got Pharaoh and he's got Jacob. Which father figure is he really going to cling to? Which story is he going to be loyal to? The story of Egypt, the story of, whatever you want to call that, leisure, the story of imperial comfort, or is he going to be loyal to a story of God's mission and what he's trying to do to put the world back together? And that's going to be a little bit, that's what we're going to look at in the episodes that are coming. We're going to have to find out what these two narratives and what these stories are in the next few episodes. But there you go, Brent. Don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, and I'm excited to revisit it in the future / past / whatever your perspective might be as you listen to this.
Time is circular, remember, Brent?
Yeah, everything's circling back. We're circling back. Jacob's circling back. Joseph is, everybody. So it's great. It's fun. A lot of text in the last couple episodes, but so many details to notice, so many things that we skipped over, plenty of opportunities for you to dig into the text yourself and wrestle through these things with your discussion group. So if you don't have a group and you want to get one together, go to bamondiscipleship.com, go to the groups page. You can look on the map and see if there's one already in your area. And if not, you can use the contact page, get in touch with us, and we'll help you get one started. All the show notes that we mentioned for Foreman's material, that's going to be there as well on the episode page or in your podcast app. If you want to support us, all of that is there. We're so thankful that listeners like you make the work that we do possible. So thanks for joining us on the Bema Podcast this week. We'll talk to you again soon.
Hi, I'm Jordan, a Bema listener and discussion group facilitator in Amesville, Oregon. And here is the prayer from episode 16's companion. Blessed are you, God of the universe, who sought to forgive and forever love me. Bring about a change in my life that chooses to do the hard work of humility, of confession, of reconciliation. May I remember that your promises are for all of creation. So teach me to get forgiveness right, to go about the world in your name, to pursue goodness, to seek justice, and to take on a role that inspires others to choose to trust the story. Amen.
You know what? I had this dream, and turns out there were 4 heads of wheat, and they were all bowing down to me. It's crazy.
That's amazing, Brent. I don't want to murder you.
Oh, good.